Welcome to a new episode of Mic'd Up with Mars, powered by Affle. My name is Deeksha Sahani, and I'm a Senior Content Marketing Manager at Affle. Mobile market in Africa is thriving as the region slowly emerges as a mobile-first economy. However, despite remarkable growth in telecommunications and mobile services, Africa as a region is rarely talked about. In today's episode, we want to throw the spotlight on Africa and debunk some common mobile UA myths. I am joined today by Joel Rao, CEO of Dentsu Digital Brands, a digital performance marketing agency. Welcome, Joel.
Thank you.
Also leading today's conversation with Joel is Ankit Rawal, Director of Business Development and Partnership at Affle. Welcome to you as well, Ankit.
Thanks, Diksha. Thanks for having me today.
I hope you're all mic'd up and set. Over to you, Ankit.
Cool. Thanks, Diksha, and thanks, Joel, to doing this. Our association has been more than a decade, so it's always good coming back to Africa. But for our listeners, why don't we start a little bit about your background and what work you're doing at Dentsu?
Thank you so much. A bit about myself. I have been in the digital space for the last 13 years now. And it only seems like yesterday because things have been really changing. I started off my career in Latin America, working very closely with an association called AdTech in partnership with Telefonica Movistar to roll out their digital marketing across the different LATAM markets. And then I had the fortunate incident of actually bumping into you, Ankit, when I was coming back home through
I still remember that. Yes.
Mobile marketing network, which has also grown in leaps and bounds. And Ankit and I worked together. That was actually the genesis of our relationship. And after that, I thought it would be great to dabble into the agency space, dealing with different brands, because whilst at InMobi, agencies were a very big part of our client base. And when I got into agency, had a chance to work a bit with WPP, setting up Ogilvy One here in Kenya, which was pretty successful, and the media division did quite well, and then ended up setting up my own company in partnership with a few individuals, like-minded individuals, through Smoke Signal, which was an affiliate of TBWA here in Kenya. So working with brands like Unilever, working with brands like Tigo, and doing a lot on that space. And it was around that time that performance marketing was growing as a practice, and getting to understand what more we can actually be able to do from a return on investment standpoint, which was the key question that a lot of clients would have. And I ended up leaving Smoke Signal to join a pure play performance marketing company called Incubator, which owns Net Media Planet, DQ&A, among other companies. And that was when really my expertise in performance marketing was entrenched. And after about 2 years of, getting to understand the practices, getting to, look at setting up performance marketing in different markets in Africa, Dentsu, being one of my clients, thought it would be great for us to set up iProspect. And so we brought in the iProspect proposition, which was coincidentally a massive competitor globally to DQ&A and Net Media Planet. But on the continent, that competition never really existed. So it was a great transition to set up, what is a global network and their practices on the continent, but with a pure play performance mindset, for clients. And we took off in 2017, and the journey has been phenomenal. Just that evolution from performance marketing into customer experiences, and focusing more around customer experiences that would eventually drive, return on investment for a lot of the clients we have, with a very key focus on customer lifetime values as a core metric that we would track, when it comes to business performance. So I think that's one of the main things we've done. At Dentsu, I'm currently running iProspect, and up until July last year, I got to take on Isobar also, which focuses on tech and creative in the digital space. And we've been working very closely with brands like Safaricom, brands like, ABS, Standard Chartered Bank, across the Dentsu group. And we're also looking at, doing quite a lot with FMCG brands in form of Upfield, Mondelez, and so on and so forth. So it has been a great journey for us. E-commerce has been a very big part of what we do since 2017, launching Masoko, to working very closely on the media side with players like Jumia, and then obviously with the Affle family, because that's where the intersection happened, and Ankit and I reconnected at that level. So it's been quite the journey for us, and that's what we're doing at Dentsu right now.
So very impressive, Joel. Very, very impressive. And it's always good to hear from you. But you know what's quite interesting is even way back when I started my African safari way back in 2009, what really impressed me was how people in Africa were really leapfrogging through mobile technology. Whether it was M-Pesa in Kenya or the Please Call Me service in South Africa. And as we all know, right, the whole app economy has really come a long way since those early days. So would really love to hear your perspectives and trends. What do you see panning out for Africa, particularly mobile and tech adoption in 2021 and beyond?
I mean, you're right. A lot has really changed. I mean, mobile connectivity is growing in leaps and bounds. The inception of mobile money, close to 12, 13 years ago has really accelerated usage of the device. I think for a very long time, the mobile device has been seen as the most ubiquitous medium on the continent. And in some markets, it still is the only screen that people would have. So you find mobile connections being more than, say, a traditional TV connectivities would be concerned. But what's really interesting though is the smartphone penetration has been growing year on year by double digits across different markets. And the one thing that we have seen as a trend is with the adoption of smartphone devices by consumers, things to do with communication, with the likes of WhatsApp, it has massively grown. Like almost everyone is on WhatsApp now, and even my grandma is using WhatsApp now. It's so interesting, and to see what comes out of that. But also the prevalence of social media platforms has really played a very big role in that digital adoption in this space. What we've also begun to see is when we were starting off in 2009 2010 on the continent, what was quite interesting was your feature phone devices were very much predominant, and money transfer was predominantly done on feature phones through USSD and SMS platforms. But that has really changed now.
I remember when I was in Nairobi, the driver mentioned that he was paying his school fees of his kids through M-Pesa, which was quite unique for Africa and the whole world at that point of time.
Yeah, exactly. But that has really changed right now because, with that in mind, M-Pesa has now gotten into that app ecosystem because of the evolution and the penetration of smartphone usage on the continent. That has really revolutionized the way people are looking at things. So suddenly M-Pesa is now an app on its own, and we will begin to see trends like this going on, a sort of thing that would actually, in my opinion, convert that model to one that would be of a super app eventually, because it's not just your school fees, it's your utilities, it's your entertainment, it's everything happening there. So it's quite interesting to see how that is going to play out. But more importantly, I strongly see a very great adoption as far as e-commerce is concerned, because the likes of Jumia have been in the space, I think since 2012. And, they've invested quite heavily, from the Rocket Internet days to what they are right now. I think it's been a great journey for such players. But what's also interesting for them is that they're also getting into the fintech space. So we're seeing a lot of fintech players coming into this environment, and with the introduction of payment solutions like Jumia Pay, which is definitely gonna take off. I think that's gonna be one of the big things they actually push. And from a competitor standpoint, we have players like Opera Software Services who set up as Opera Mini on the continent, but they're diversifying into OPay, which is a very similar product to Jumia, and at the same time they're also getting into lending through Okash also. So I think it's quite interesting to see how the space is changing. Fintech is definitely a front runner in a lot of the things that we're doing, and now we are seeing the banks also now getting into that space. Mobile lending is becoming a big thing. Mobile banking is becoming a big thing. A lot of banks are shutting down their branches. We always thought about this happening, but it's now a reality that, hey, brick and mortar is slowly but surely being replaced. I still think there's a part they play in the ecosystem, but tech adoption has grown over the last 7 to 10 years over time. So that's quite interesting to see what's happening in this space.
Absolutely, and I think COVID really accelerated that, right? Like, interestingly, the categories you mentioned, like e-commerce or fintech, and if I can add maybe food delivery, grocery deliveries across the world, whether it is here in India, Indonesia, Brazil, across the board in emerging markets, I think what it should have happened in 5 years got compressed in few months. So that's quite fascinating.
Yeah, you're right. COVID was that catalyst that the world needed. That's what I always say. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. One of the other things when you think of Africa, right, and especially even for me when I was starting my journey almost a decade ago, that it's a big continent, right? There are 54 countries, and the whole ecosystem from an outside in looks very, very fragmented. So, and curious, like you've been in the industry for the last 13 years, what do you think are some of the common misconceptions about mobile African users globally, right? So if you are a global brand in US or Europe or even in Asia, what do you think some of the misconceptions people have about the African users?
I think the biggest misconception is that Africa is one country, first and foremost, because there's a lot of misconception that the African consumer is similar across the board. We are 54 different nations with a population of about 1.3 billion people, with thousands and thousands of cultures. And even within one country, you'd have, close to 56, 57 different languages being spoken. And each language group has its own culture. So we are a very, very diverse nation across the continent. And because of that aspect, then the consumer is also as diverse as the different countries are concerned. So one misconception that I see is, bucketing, consumers on the continent as one massive, block. And I keep on telling like some of the multinationals that, want to get into the continent to do business, is that we cannot look at it in that way. The consumer is different. And our model has always been to place the consumer at the center of any ecosystem we develop around them, because we realized quite quickly that, a consumer in Nigeria is very different from a consumer in Ghana, and these are two neighboring countries. And the consumer in Kenya would be very different, say, from a consumer in Tanzania, yet they are two different countries and they're neighboring each other. And it's the same thing with Southern Africa and so on and so forth. So it's really important for us to be able to understand the consumer habits, because you're coming to solve a problem, or you're coming to deliver a service, or you're coming to sell a product to these consumers. These consumers are not all the same. They're very different, and you can't bucket them in the traditional ways that would bucket consumers, say, in North America or in APAC and so on and so forth. So that's one aspect of it. The other misconception that I tend to see a lot is, you get stories, amplified in the West that, mobile connectivity has really grown. To be very honest, there are some countries that are not there yet. So for example, a market like Ethiopia, for example, massive economic opportunity for any entrepreneur in the continent. You have, a big population there, but, internet connectivity is not what you'd think it is, for example. So as a result of that, their consumption habits would be, say, different from a Kenya that has had, great internet connectivity over the last decade or so. And so that's the other misconception that you see, that, hey, internet connectivity across the different African markets is more or less the same. No, it's not the same. Internet connectivity.
What about data prices? Do they vary across these countries?
Oh, massively, massively. So data prices in SA are, quite expensive compared to, say, Kenya, yet SA is a more mature economy. The price of 1 GB there would be very different from the price of 1 GB. I don't have the exact numbers, but every time I travel to South Africa, I feel like I'm spending more for less amount of data. And you always have to be, connecting to Wi-Fi. It's the same thing with Nigeria. I think the country that has the lowest data cost right now is Ghana, if I'm not wrong.
That's interesting. Nobody will think about Ghana.
Exactly. So it's very different. So the connectivity is different. Obviously, prices of data in Ethiopia are much higher compared to what you'd have, to neighboring countries. And it's really interesting to see that. And then as a result of that, penetration of data, then also your smartphone adoption is different across the different markets. So
I remember that time there was a Huawei EDOS phone, which
Yeah.
was the most prevalent phone. I'm talking about 2011, 2012. So curious, how is the smartphone penetration now, and what kind of handsets do people generally adopt across, say, South Africa, Kenya, Nigeria, or even Egypt for that matter?
Yeah, so surprisingly, Android still leads the way from a smartphone, standpoint. There is a lot of, emphasis on that. But what has been interesting though is, unlike a couple of years ago, where when you look at the smartphone market, it was about like 99% smart devices being Android. Apple devices have actually played a very big role in coming in. And one thing that we've also noticed is that even within that Android ecosystem, players like an Infinix, Itel, who's the other player? This Chinese companies. Techno, have really, really grown in that space, and it's because of the affordability of the device. So what we are beginning to see right now is telco companies operating across the region are now coming in with like low-end smartphones that have slightly better quality. And now what they're doing is, very similar to what would be device financing across, different markets. That is actually, something that is being picked up. So I know in South Africa, Vodafone has actually, undertaken that. In Kenya, Safaricom is also doing like this whole device financing. And it's so interesting because it's taking root, especially during this COVID period, where you say, okay, you might not be able to afford that, device, but we'll provide you financing, which was a foreign thing, like 5-6 years ago here. And that has actually gone ahead to to get us to where we need to be from a connectivity standpoint. So right now, your Technos, your Infinix, your Itels are really blazing the market, but Apple is really growing also in the region, just because there's a growing middle class also within the region. So it's quite interesting to see where that is going.
Interesting. So again, maybe a follow-up to this, right? Like, so then again, if I'm a global company, either in the US or here in Asia, and I want to build a business in Africa, right? Because while it is a little behind the curve, we all know it's a 1.3 billion people. They will become mobile is the center of accessibility of any kind of service, banking, you mentioned, food delivery. Tomorrow it will be education, so on and so forth. So how would somebody go about? What do you think would be a good GTM for someone who wants to build a mobile first business in Africa?
Number one, I think the first inside view that I can actually provide for that is understand your consumer. Not everyone is, around the same living standard measure. As I mentioned, don't come with a product or with a service that's meant to cater for the masses, yet you actually do have a very aggressively growing middle class in the markets. So taking that into consideration, number one, just understanding your consumer. That is going to be a very big part. If you want to get it right, then you have to have a people first mindset, period. That's the first thing. The second thing that I would also say is, depending on the product or the service that is obviously mobile first, you probably want to look at the category in which you're operating and see, what other players are doing in the continent. So for example, I mentioned the fintech space has been growing aggressively. So if you are a business based in the West and you're coming to play in the fintech space here, then you'd want to actually look at that and look at what the category is currently doing, because the way things are happening here is different. Same thing with the e-commerce environment. You might, introduce new models of e-commerce that haven't been your traditional e-commerce models, warehousing or marketplace for that matter. I think what's really interesting is, what the category is doing. There is always a method to the madness for companies that are coming here. So it won't always be like, hey, I want to set up an e-commerce shop, say in Nigeria, but addressing systems are very different. It's something that it's not really marked as we know it in other markets. So whenever we think about what the category is doing, taking such things into consideration. And then the third thing that I would always advise is you focus on your own truth as a business. So what's your brand truth? What's your business truth? What are you trying to do? And if you can have those three aspects coming together, it's very easy for you to actually have a very clear guiding theme as to how you're going to actually launch your business, and what, from a marketing standpoint, then what is it that you're going to actually communicate to consumers within the marketplace, consumers who you've already understood based on the consumer study that you've done so far, to get you to what you need to do on the continent. I think it's really important for us to look at those three things. Number one, understanding your consumer. Number two, understand the category in which you're coming to play in. And then number three, understanding what your truth is, what your business truth or what your brand truth is, to give you a very clear guiding theme of what you want to do in the continent.
Got it. Interesting. Cool. I think maybe let's change tracks a little bit. Let me make you wear your marketing hat, right? And you've been in the performance business for quite some time, now a performance marketing agency. But interestingly, we are seeing that the whole notion of what is brand marketing and performance marketing is really, really blurring. So do you see a similar trend in Africa, in Kenya with your clients, where a brand marketer is asking about conversions downstream, or a performance marketer is also interested on brand lift, so on and so forth? So is that lines blurring for your clients in Kenya or in Africa in general?
I think it's more of a convergence that's happening rather than a blurriness, and it's also part of that, the what is it called? It's part of the leapfrogging aspect that happened here. So unlike in other markets where performance marketing has been there for the past 10, 15 years, in the big markets in Kenya, South Africa, Nigeria, it's only been existing for the past close to 5 to 7 years or so. And brand marketing has always been, that old school marketing has always been a very big part of businesses across this area. So when we were introducing performance marketing, it seemed like a very foreign thing, where you tell someone like, tell me what your business targets are, and we focus your marketing on that. Brand marketing was very different. We just focus on getting top of mind awareness, aspects of our communications out there. Mm-hmm. What we have seen so far, especially in the e-commerce space, is if you do not have, just because of the nature of the people and the consumption habits that they have and the cultural aspects, if you do not do brand marketing, then any performance marketing efforts you have is going to be useless. And what we've kind of realized is that there's this sort of convergence that's happening, whereby your brand top of the funnel activities would then influence whatever investment you have that would influence your bottom funnel activities, where performance marketing plays a very big role. And so that's the sort of convergence that we've seen, and we've seen it on e-commerce, whereby whenever we run TV, radio, print, even branding on a digital standpoint, then we see a lot of conversions coming through at the bottom of the funnel. And if we only go for bottom funnel activities, focusing on optimizing and retargeting and all the great stuff we do for performance marketing, then it only goes so far. But branding actually gives you that lift that you always need. So the convergence that we are seeing is branding and performance coming together and playing a very big role. Actually, internally within the group globally, I don't know whether you've read in the news, but iProspect, which is our performance marketing division, is working very closely with Visium, and that sort of merging of two practices, Visium being a branding agency that does a lot of above the line, coming to work very closely with iProspect to form this merged way of doing things, is actually gonna be a big part of what we do moving forward as we look at a one Dentsu offering for our clients. So it's really interesting, because this is something that we are taking very seriously in the market, the convergence between branding and performance marketing.
No, I think very true. And in fact, that whole theme around convergence, unification, I see it in across different aspects of marketing. Right? Like, I'll give you our own example that we recently launched our unified audience platform, where we realized that for a marketer today, it's a huge maze to travel, right? Because there are different sources of channels you can acquire users, whether it is through influencer-based marketing, whether it is through affiliate, ad network, programmatic. And for a new marketer, he's really, really confused. And if we can unify all that under one platform, it will be really, really relevant. So obviously that convergence themes is coming up. You mentioned about one Dentsu, where that whole notion of what is brand and performance is really blurring. And the other interesting example of this convergence I'm seeing, I think, which you also alluded as super app, right? So today M-Pesa is
Yes.
no longer just a fintech app, it's trying to provide all services. Jumia is doing that. Or I know, for example, Halal in Egypt is trying to do that. So do you see this whole unification or super app also coming together in Africa, and you see some examples of WeChat equivalent happening there?
For sure. Absolutely. And it's so interesting that, we talk about the super app emergence in Africa. I think when we saw it in China, it was born out of a need when we had geopolitical causes that, got China into the position that it was. Like Google Play was not there. Consumer missed out on a lot of offerings that Google would have to offer. And Tencent, have obviously done a great job in building out WeChat. We are now beginning to see that happening on the continent, but not because of a geopolitical play, but because of, again, a consumer need. Now, what's happening right now is that we have, the app ecosystem having a lot of, apps that have different purposes. So you have ride hailing, you have food delivery, you have e-commerce, you have entertainment, you have social media, you have what else? Social media, entertainment,
Education, tech,
e-commerce,
health,
education, exactly. Fintech, all, you have different apps that do different things. What we're beginning to see is, number one, because there's a device limitation. Again, markets are very different. Phones can only store a few apps. Even with the new smartphones that we have, not everyone is on our phone that can actually support different things. There is a very big opportunity with the super app coming in to take on multiple apps there. That's the first thing. And then that, combined with the fact that there has been systematic underbanking or unbanked consumers, it makes the continent a very prime location for emerging super apps. And in my mind, the fintech players are way ahead of the curve as far as this is concerned. So we're seeing M-Pesa doing that right now. In fact, they recently launched the new M-Pesa app that allows you to pay for your utilities, do your shopping, pay for your cab services. Like it's a very interesting, aspect that they've actually, come out. And suddenly there's, I see them going up against, say, a Visa or a MasterCard in a few years' time, if you asked me. That's one aspect of it. The other thing that I have seen is, players like Cellulant. I don't know whether you remember Cellulant back in the day. They used to focus on digital content. They've actually evolved into a fintech player. So they have, introduced different payment gateways, PayPal-like, solution that would allow people to just make payments directly on their mobile devices and connecting to different mobile payment solutions like M-Pesa and Airtel Money and so on and so forth. So I see that coming into play, and that omni-channel conversation comes into play. In South Africa, Vodafone have actually partnered with, I think it's the Alibaba Group, to be able to create a super app specifically for ride hailing, for money transfer and financial services, insurance, and so on and so forth, that would actually come into play. So, they're working very closely with Alipay, if I'm not wrong. Yeah, it's Alipay actually, who are actually going to be the tech provider for that. So it's really interesting to see what is happening in this space. And because of those two situations, I think it's a very interesting opportunity for a lot of the players to actually come and take part in that super app play.
So, but actually the challenge is that not every app can become a super app, and still, if you're a marketer, you are in an app economy, you still need to acquire users. So any learnings or tips and tricks for a mobile user acquisition guy in Africa, even if he's not from Africa, what are those 2 or 3 things he should do? Obviously, first is to hire you as one of our partners because you obviously understand. But beyond that, any tips and tricks for someone who wants to acquire mobile African users either in Kenya or in South Africa?
Because you've understood, obviously, when you're setting up, and I mentioned the three things: understanding the consumer, understanding the category you're playing in, and then looking at your actual truth. I think the moment you understand your consumer, that plays a very big role in that part of our acquisition process, because you already know what your truth is, what your unique selling proposition looks like, and it's just crafting that to that consumer that is going to play a very big role in this convergent environment.
Brand. From a channel of acquisition, I was trying to allude that, like, is Google, Facebook the only channels, or do they look at other channels like TikTok or
okay
supply out there?
I think Google and Facebook will still remain relevant. There are a few African players, a few African DSPs that have really focused on creating niche consumers around the African space. So there are players like MediaPal, Eskimi have also been in the continent for a while, and they've been able to actually collect different data points on how to acquire customers as a very big part of businesses today. So I think Google, Facebook will still continue to become big. One player though that has been underplayed for a very long time is Opera Mini. And Opera Mini have their own advertising proposition, and they have traditionally been the app that helps people surf the internet by compressing their data points. And that's become a very interesting play for Sub-Saharan Africa. In South Africa, there are players like Moya, who are on a data-free surfing. So consumers would actually download the Moya app on their smart devices, and then when they use the browser, they're actually surfing for free. So that's also another super app that's coming up in South Africa. So they do chats.
A model I never heard about, something like that.
Yeah. So they're doing chats, they're doing browsing. I think video is also part of it. So it's a very interesting model that's coming up. And these are some of those unique African players that you'd have to look at. But more importantly, I think, from a customer acquisition standpoint, I think crafting that customer experience aspect of it is going to be really critical, because it's one thing to acquire a consumer, it's another thing to maintain them within your ecosystem. And I think that's where the value is, if you ask me.
No, absolutely. I think retention is the new growth, and we understand that. Actually, in fact, we've worked on those lines for one of your clients, so that's great.
Yeah.
Cool. I think maybe I'll just make it a little more interesting, a little bit more fun. So we'll again change tracks, and this will be like a rapid fire round for you, Joel. And again, I'll request if you can answer in max 10 words or less.
Okay.
So define Joel in one word.
My goodness. One word that would define me is...
a few words maybe, yeah.
No, unstoppable. That's the one word.
Interesting. Unstoppable.
Yeah.
Cool. What makes you remain growth focused?
The ever-changing world on digital, crypto. Between 2020 and 2021, blockchain is now increasingly becoming part of what seems to be the new Web 3.0. So I think for me, remaining relevant allows me to remain growth focused in that way as an individual. So I think that's something that you're quite interested in looking at.
Interesting. Cool. And any quote or any learning, something do you live by?
The one quote that I always live by is by Nike. The slogan that says, "Just do it." I've just realized that, we live in an environment where people know a lot. There's a lot of theoretical minded individuals in our society today. And I think just doing it is just the best way to go. You'll fail fast and learn faster. Or rather, fail faster, learn fast. So just do it is a quote that I always live by.
I'm sure you have read his autobiography, Phil Knight's Shoe Dog.
Yes.
Got it. And maybe some daily habit that has been a game changer, which some of our listeners can adopt. Any daily habit that has been a game changer for you?
One thing that has been a game changer for me personally has been the aspect of meditating. And this is something that I took up last year, just allowing quietening my mind in days, in an era where we live, where mental health is increasingly becoming a very big part of what we do. Meditation has been one of those things that has really helped me quiet my mind and focus on who I want to be in the future now. And so, building that out has really been a very big game changer for me personally.
Absolutely. I can personally vouch for it. Mindful meditation is something I've been practicing for a few years, and it has a great soothing effect, if I can put it, in this whole chaotic world out there. So absolutely.
Yeah.
So absolutely, I think it was really great, Joel, to talk to you about Africa, what's happening, what to expect in 2021. But before I let you go, any parting thoughts for our listeners, especially because a lot of our listeners are outside Africa, any parting thoughts for them who wants to build a mobile first business in Africa?
Well, this is what I have to say. The continent is the last frontier for anyone to come in and create not just generational wealth, but also generational changes in the global society. A lot of innovations are being birthed from within the continent, from a growing population that's, under the age of 23 on average. It's really interesting to see how much you can actually be able to get out of this population. And it's an educated population too. And so the traditional mindsets that, Africa, still requires a lot of aid, or, education is not, a big part of it. The governments over the last, couple of decades have really invested in educating their population. And it's a young and growing and energetic population. So if you want to come in and be part of the untapped frontier where a lot of innovation is happening, then this is the place to be. This is the place where you can actually create generational wealth, and not just generational wealth, but also creating generational value to society at large.
Well, absolutely. I can personally vouch for it, as you and a lot of listeners would know that my career started with Africa and has some of the fascinating, momentous memories of that continent. And I keep joking to my wife that if I retire, Africa would be the continent, South Africa would be where I'll go and retire. So, absolutely.
Yeah.
Great, Joel. I think it was really fascinating speaking to you and learn so much about Africa. And hopefully this will be very helpful for a lot of our listeners.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Joel. I think that was really beautiful to create generational wealth and generational change, adding real value to the world. So once again, thank you for joining us. I think a unique opportunity awaits both local and global advertisers for app development and marketing in the subcontinent. And you hit the nail on the head when you say that it's not just about serving a continent of billion plus people, but it's about understanding the various countries, languages, and cultures. So with that, I wrap up today's podcast episode. Thank you to you both once again. And also thank you to our dear listeners for tuning in. You can connect with our participants on LinkedIn and also visit mass.affle.com for more interesting content. See you next time.